Okay, I think we're live. That's how these things always start. I think we're live. It's like, is the lens cap off? Is this taking a photo or not? My God. Welcome to the Art of Rock. It's Saturday. God damn it. And we're all being loud and rousy here. I would like to acknowledge the land I'm standing on as Tongva land. They are the traditional landowners of Los Angeles, California. Thank you for surviving. Sincerely, thank you for surviving. Join us every Saturday. We're here at 9 o'clock in LA or 12 o'clock on the East Coast, or I think it's 6 o'clock in Berlin and 7 o'clock in England. I just don't know. But we're here on Angelspit's damn Twitch. And if you're watching on YouTube, Twitch might also be a fun place to watch. I just don't know. This is made possible with Angelspit's Patreon. Thank you so much. You can join it for free, and you can get heaps of stuff for free. Or you could join for as little as $3 a month to keep me going and that stuff, or not. Everything there will eventually be free anyway. Patreon members do get digital copies of everything. Yay, digital copies of everything. New album is kickstarting now. I passed the goal by $1. Thank you so much. I'm just worried if somebody pulls out, will they renege? Gee, I don't know. Thanks, Kickstarter. But it's kickstarting, and I'm really proud of this album. I think you're going to love it. Industrial Scissors is something you're definitely going to love. It's a whole bunch of tracks on bloody Spotify. Go listen to them and follow the bands you like. Thumb them up and stuff. We got to keep them going. Every Wednesday night, Vulture Culture does a deep dive into synthesizers, and it's so good. It really is good. So please jump on that and have a scum drink with him and the rest of the pirate crew. And it's really good fun. Oh, look, it's merch. Go get it if you want. I don't really mind. I didn't really mean to put that in there, but I'm such a professional. I don't give a shit. If you want more non-stop amazingness from the bleeding edge, MTV TV. And once we're done, we're going to raid on over to MTV TV and watch some amazingness. You will find your new favorite band. I always say that, but it's the truth. And it's a great reminder that fantastic bloody music is still coming up from the underground. And if you want to get involved, send them your music. They will play it. They're amazing. They also have a Patreon. Please support them. We've got to keep them going. And they're great. And also, Razi, thank you so much for co-hosting this and being the dude.
Oh, hey, you're welcome, and thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, this is the Art of Rock. A couple of people said they'd jump on, but they didn't. Including TC was, JT was supposed to jump in. And where the fuck is Alex? I don't know. Anyway, look, I want to talk about pads. Let's talk about pads, specifically synth pads. I want to know what your thoughts are, what your sounds are. Jen, it's good to see you. All of that fun stuff, if I may rant first. So I'm working on... Pads are really fascinating to me because it's like they define the mood. It is this great big, okay, this is what the mood is right now. And if you're doing Ice Planet stuff or, ambient stuff or XYZ, you might want that. But for stuff like heavy driving Angelspit stuff, you might not want that. It might be a good thing to do in the build-up. But pads I find are really, in harsher music, difficult because they put a big smiley face or frowny face, a very big obvious thing on the mood of the song. Secondly, is they're taking up a lot of frequencies because it's this thing that keeps going, so it's there. And when you take the pads out, there's this big space left, and sometimes that can be a really fantastic thing to have massive amounts of space in there. So one thing I will do a lot of is vocode pads. Like if I want to have the vibe of pads, I use a vocoder. So it's right in there under the vocals and it's giving hints of the emotion. Think of it like it's the monster in Alien that you don't see in its full entirety until the ends. You see the shadow of the monster, you see the saliva of the monster, you see the damage the monster is doing, but you don't see the monster itself. And pads are like that too. If there is the shadow and the hint of it, it makes more mystery. This is also going to go into a rant of arpeggiators. So if I make a pad sound, and if it's going into a vocoder, it's a great big buzzy sound. But if it's not going into a vocoder, I'm going to have something that is modulating as much as possible, so that even each oscillator is being turned up and turned down, or the oscillators are, the waveform in it is going from something harsh like a ramp through to a triangle, or they're modulating. So there's a whole bunch of movement going on, because having something that goes, you're going to get sick of that shit real quick. And you want them to breathe. You want them to be like the breath, like wind. And sometimes the wind is blowing at you. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the tide's coming in. Sometimes it's going out. Sometimes it's just sand. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 inches deep with water. Sometimes it's up to your knees. Do you understand what I'm saying here? So I want to hear some of your thoughts, because I could rant about pads. Maz, I don't know why they call it a pad. Don't know. Oh, Raz does.
I mean, that's where I was going to jump in, actually. Like, there's a pejorative basis to having even called it a pad. Like, generally, when you've got something nice and you pad it with something, it's the cheaper shit that you're putting in there. You're padding an essay with a lot of bullshit words. So there's a bit of a diss built into just calling these things pads in that way. And there's something to that. Like, this is the default fallback. We're going to do a chord progression. It's with a long, evolving, sustained sound that holds the chords, and that's the harmonic structure, instead of building it out of individual, like 4-string sections like you would do in classical music. And I think, to an extent, there's something to take away from that attitude, in that do some interesting chord voicings and build your voice leading nicely in these pads, and now you're starting to do something, and then do some of the motion that Carl's talking about, so that the structure of the sound, the timbre, is actually related to the lyrical things or the mood of the sections. There's a lot you can do to tightly integrate what could be considered just a default way of doing something into something that you've actually put a lot of creativity and effort into. And you do see, like, when you're going through your defaults on your synth, there's like motion pad and deluxe rich pad and evolving pad, and there's lots of different kinds of ways of heightening just what could be a very simple sustained 1/3 fifth with an octave in the bottom block chord thing that you're holding down. So there's some thoughts.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I love it. I'm going with it. It's great. It's truth from now on. I'm going to make a suggestion, because when you were talking and then this and then this, I just realized this is a massive topic. So what I want to do is, and Ivan, I hope this isn't fucking with your thing. The first thing I want to talk about is sound design. Then after we've talked about sound design in half an hour, I want to talk about the actual choice of notes and what the notes are doing. And then after we talked about that, in another half an hour, I want to talk about effects and mixing. So I would like to firstly, and Ivan, since you've got your hand up, let's talk about sound design. Let's not try and talk about notes too much. We're not going to talk about arpeggiators or anything else yet. But, and also incidentally, I refer to them as clouds, or soundscape or sky. But I want to hear what you say about sound design. Ivan, go.
Okay. My first question, because I'm going to have some questions and I'm going to have some answers. First question, though, is what's the difference between a pad and a drone?
Okay. Well,
because like the Lyra 8 is a drone synth. It makes drones. I tend to lean on the Quantrid Swarm when I want to make pads, or the Hydra synth, because the Hydrosynth is really good at that. Like really, really good at it, just because of all the modulation. And modulation is the magic for pads. I don't care what anybody thinks. Um, Also, modulation is the magic that makes the Quadrant Swarm work, with the advantage of it just being Euro rack. So like I can plug modulation in left, right, and center without even trying, or without having to think that hard about it, and I can modulate it in magical ways just because Eurorack gives you the ability to do that kind of magic. But I mean, like, what really is the difference between the two? The first question.
I will gladly let you know what I think. And this is just my opinion. A drone is something that keeps going. Like, you know how a bagpipe has a drone and you're playing something over, that's a drone. That's what I think a drone is. What we're talking about here, as far as the sound design and everything else, could probably definitely appeal to both. But I think there's actually, like, musically, as far as I'm concerned, there is a difference. When you start mixing the two, it might start with the drone and then off it goes. That could be very interesting. That's what I think.
I think that is interesting, and with the right instrumentation, being able to jump from just a drone to like an evolving pad, turn it into an evolving pad. Like, there's a lot of ways you could accomplish that, which is, it's actually kind of cool.
Did anybody else, did you want to, like, I know Razi's got thoughts on that. I'm sure Brett has. Do you want to?
Yeah,
Razi,
let's
well,
find out.
Brett, you've got your hand up. Do you want to tell us, did you have a definition of the difference between a drone and a pad?
A drone and a pad. So yes and no. A drone is, so a pad usually for my uses involves more movement, where a drone is something like a pedal note, like on a guitar. But not necessarily the static thing, either way. And where it comes into sound design, which is part of what I try to do, drones and pads and synths they're like supporting instruments, or supporting sounds, or it's what I've used to describe, like when I say I want to build environments and whatnot in it, to where it puts you in it. These pads and such may not be, they're serving the function of filling a space, but for a reason. Instead of maybe like you would see like a chord playing a lot of times. Thought. So.
Wonderful thought. Thank you. Razi, what are your thoughts on the difference? And then we'll throw back to Ivan, because...
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that pads can drone, but drone is more of a musical function, like a harmonic, melodic description of what it's doing, and pad is what it describes how it fills the space in the mix, the sonic space in the mix. Kind of like the culinary distinction between fruits and vegetables. Like, it's not really a fact of the world, it's just a implementation description.
That's very interesting. Okay, thank you. Ivan, please continue.
Okay. Like describing it as fruits and vegetables and using culinary language to describe what's going on between the two is actually it really brings out the distinction between the two, which is great. Because they are technically different things. Like, they often get used as the same thing. I mean, the pads, or more importantly, pad sounds on, the default on your favorite synthesizer, they tend to have a lot more attack and variation up at the the front third of the sound, whereas drones, like, they don't really have that. They kind of do their samey across the length of their time in existence. So like the Lyra 8, again, drone synthesizer, it's good at like having a foot in both worlds because you can do things like change the bass notes of what's going on underneath of it. And so you can almost get melodic with it, kind of roughly. And it's kind of good at that, in a way that others just like aren't as good at. So I think we've got a reasonably good description of what the difference is between these two things. At least it's working for me.
This is great. I do like this a lot. Thank you. Did you want to talk any more about sound design, or will I throw it to Mr. Raz?
Okay. I gotta say, like in the end, I really like using the Quantric Swarm for generating pad sounds because uh being able to just modulate anything however you'd like
May
is
I ask you, is that software or hardware?
that would be hardware. I'm using the Swarm.
Okay, could you put a link to that one for those of us who are not familiar
I
with?
most certainly will because I really like it. I bought the Swarm based on a recommendation from Edward K. Spell. Like he was loving the Swarm and mentioned it in a podcast, and I was just like, well, I mean, if he likes it, I'll probably like it. And he was right. you know,
Okay.
and the nice thing is it can do a lot more than just drones. Or pads. It's a fairly versatile instrument. And then the nice thing with the Hydrasynth is it's a big engine. It does big engine stuff. This is a premium synthesizer that does premium synth stuff. And you're not going to find anybody that's used one out there in the wild that's like, oh, those things are bullshit, they sound thin, because it's rich and full sounding across the board almost by default. To get it to sound thin, you'd have to actually, like, I don't know, go out of your way. That's everything through a high pass filter or something. But that like for pad sounds, lots of things are generally good at it. Some things are just better at it than others. And like on the sound design thing, you kind of need to be careful not to like overdo the wrong parts of it, because like you're changing, if you're doing something melodic with your pads, you don't you you want to be able to actually hear that's changing. And if you're just like filling it all up with static, you're not, or filling it up with the wrong tone, you're going to get lost in it, and that might not always be a good thing. So they're useful but kind of dangerous at the same time.
Thank you very much. It's really incredible that when you have a synthesizer that does everything, you want to do everything with it, and that can get very cluttery very quickly. Thank you for that. Razi, sound design or whatever.
Do hope not to veer too much into the other areas just by talking about sound design, but let's kick out a few basics that come to mind. I don't think I'm going to reinvent anything here, but let's say you start off with something that's built on just a sawtooth, couple of waves. They're a little bit detuned. It sounds rich when you play the chord. It's got a good long sustain. There's no fade off in it. It's just a sound. You hear it. You press the keys. You get the chord. It's buzzy. It's bright. Next thing you might want to add to that to cause it to be designed, because that's pretty default, is take your low frequency oscillator and modulate your filter. Oh, you can do it with the tempo. Now the sound is getting a little bit brighter and duller in tempo with the music. That's a pretty basic concept. I think it might be the first thing you reach for, but it's in the way of designing a sound with intention that has something to do with the song that you're putting it into. You're starting to get something, and you can go from there, where you might divide the low frequency on quarter notes, whole notes, different beat divisions. You might offset it a little bit so you're getting, 3 against 4 interactions. There's some fun things that you can start dreaming and doing just without very really basic sound design feature. And I think like level 2 of that might be, you've got your same rich, bright, brassy kind of thing that just holds on as you play the chords of the song, and place a filter after that in modular sense. Like maybe it's an outboard filter, maybe it's in your DAW. That filter is now able to change how much frequencies it cuts out or boosts based on another track of your song. You've got a kick and a snare. Send those to the side chain of the filter, the EQ, and cause it to become brighter on the kick and snare hits. Now your pad will be dull and almost inaudible for most of its duration, but it'll brighten up along with the hits of the kick and snare. Another interesting but very simple and basic way to start designing the sound of that thing. And then, like, lastly, one of the things that you might, even closer to true sound design and synth patch design, is if you've got something like the PPG wave or wavetable, and you've got a wavetable that has some very dramatic shifts in timbre, so it goes from bright to dull to clangy to atonal, synchronize on tempo the scrolling through the wavetable. So you've got a very dramatically shifting tonality held on the same chords. That can be super dramatic. That, of course, depends entirely on what your wavetable contains. If they're all the same sounds, you're not going to get anything very dramatic. Like if it goes from pulse 10 to pulse 15, might not even notice it. But if it goes from sawtooth to atonal bell to noise, those are interesting, shifts and stuff. So I'd love to think of some more, but those are
Thank you.
for a few that come to mind in designing.
May I ask you, what synth is your go-to, hardware or software, that you like for pads? What's your personal go-to?
Wow, that's a really, really pointed question, because I don't have one. Like, I'll take anything that's going to just start out with no motion and waves, and I'll go from there. Like, I don't really care which synth it is. I'm in Ableton Live these days. I go for plug-in or built-in native stuff just by default, because I know it's going to be there next time I open the app and I don't have to patch anything in, and I'm lazy. And I kind of don't really care which synth it is. I mean, there's ones in there like Flow and I'll stop even naming stuff because it does not matter so much. I know I'm going to get there, and I'll dump it and start with another one in a couple of minutes if it's not going the way I wanted, or if it ends up not having the modulation complexity that I was expecting. Yeah, I'm going to add so much reverb at the end anyway that who cares what synth we started with. Let's just say that. It's a pad.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
Or Native
that.
Instruments Massive, sorry.
Okay.
What I said or that.
All right. Thank you. Brett, what are your thoughts about sound design?
All right, so in terms of sound design, it's hard to talk about sound design without including some effects, like Raziel mentioned there a little bit. But the sentiment's largely the same. You asked about like synth. For me, it's more like give me any audio source, and if it's the right tonality for what I'm doing, then I'm going to turn it into something that is going to act as a pad in some way. And usually what I define a pad as is something that is a little more forgiving about timing. Something that can sit there and carry the melody or carry a tonality. And you got to keep in mind too that a lot of what I want to do is kind of horror themed. So these are not necessarily nice, clear tones. I have one that I really like that I made on the Kurzweil, for example. It's a voice that I modified from an existing pad called Bode Brutales. And it sounds like these metal bowls that you're feeling your finger on, and it gives it a real interesting motion and shimmer. But I find that works best when there's a track that is really rhythm heavy, really sonically dense, and you need something to brighten things. Otherwise, someone's going to put it on and they're not going to be interested, or they're just going to be beat up, more or less, by the sound. So using pads, or the thing, or the term pad for me, is really difficult to describe. I will tell you that I can explain it in a sense of how I first started making my own pads, which was to take the quadriverb, put a 10-second delay, output everything it does to a digital recorder, and then I would literally fill the room with electronic devices that were playing simultaneously. TVs, radios, tape recorders, whatever. And I would walk around the room with a microphone that had an on and off switch. And I would sit there and I'd build what I called chaos tracks. And it would literally be as this delay overrode itself and began to eat itself, it would create this kind of thing. Well, I would chop those up and turn them into triggered instruments. And then I could play them back faster, slower, in different pitches and all kinds of things. And it created something that filled in between the guitars and drums at the time. But again, that was the purpose of that design. That's kind of how I approach it today still. It's just different sources.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Wow. Okay, so if I may, when I'm building a pad, there's two ways to build a pad. One is via a sampler and one's via a synthesizer, and they're two very different ways of working because there's a bunch of things samplers can't do, which synthesizers can do, and vice versa. So if I'm going to a synthesizer, I need lots of modulation. And my theory on a pad is if you hold down one note, take off all the reverb, all the everything, how long does it take you to get bored of that sound? And so I try and make a sound that is interesting and engaging for several minutes just by holding down that one note. And that's going to be achieved through a whole bunch of modulating stuff. Like something I love doing is that if you have the ability for a matrix, like let's say you have 2 or 3 oscillators and oscillator 2 and 3 are ring mod and ring modulating together, and that's creating a tone, and that's coming up on its own mixer. So we're going to put a really big slow LFO on that ring mod so that that's really slowly coming up and really slowly coming down. So already there's this higher harmonic, like a wave, that's there. And then another thing you might do is you might get those 2 oscillators that are causing the ring mod, and you might be causing them to also be volume on an LFO as well. And you might have a bit of detune going on in there as well. And when I say detune, I mean actually it's a sign from an LFO that if it's oscillator slop, for example, like sequential has oscillator slop, which will throw a VCO out of tune more, you can assign that. So it's not an actual amount that's being detuned, it's the accuracy of the oscillator that it's going to start drifting and then it's going to pull back in again. Then it's going to drift again, and then it's going to pull back in. And when you do things like this, you start creating really nice environments. Another thing I like to do is assign velocity to attack. So the harder I hit the note, the faster the attack is. So if I want to use it as a more leading thing, I can do that by banging the keys harder. And then detuning is really powerful. No. For me, hold on, for me, it's not really wavetables. I mean, like, haven't got to that yet, but thank you for asking. Adapt, manipulate. Mine is straight up oscillators, like they're analog oscillators. If I was going to use a wavetable, it would have to be shifting from wavetable to other wavetable. So there's lots of things moving. But that's the really interesting thing about a wavetable, is that if I've got a wavetable moving, I don't want 3 wavetables on top of each other. I just want to hear the one. Because one thing I think you've got to be really careful of is when you start using lots of reverb and lots of delay and lots of everything, you start losing the definition of what the sound is doing, and that's just going to end up with paste. I don't always want paste. Like sometimes you might want paste. Like for example, you might have a sound that is one oscillator that this is the pitch, and the pitch is slowly moving like that. If you put a delay on that, it's going to start doing this, which is going to be a nice chorus. But if you put a long reverb on that, it's going to be this very pretty smear. So it's all usable. But I try, and when I'm doing lots of really nice, intricate sound design, is to be very aware of what is smearing, because I could lose the original intensity of what's going on. Like, you know how you love layering things up. Maybe sometimes that's not what you want to do, because you're going to lose the beauty of that sound itself. I guess I'd like to change my answer. Wavetable pans are incredible. Yes, I just said pans. Sorry. But with old subtractive stuff, out of my arsenal, Matrix 6 or K3. Good call. Very good choice. Okay. So when it comes to a sample, I will use, for them, it's a lot of volumes. And obviously with then once you've figured out all that stuff that's going on in the analog world, you put a big filter on it. And don't, having a high pass and a notch, fantastic, with resonance. Not too much though. And you know, obviously everything's moving a little bit as well, and you can create some absolutely beautiful things. And one thing, really nice thing you might want to do as well, is that with your attack, instead of the volume coming up, it might be the high pass frequency that comes down. So it comes in as a sizzle, and then it comes to land, and then you take your fingers off and it goes back up into a sizzle. So the actual cutoff frequency on the high pass comes down. When you take your note off, it goes back up. Samples, I use a lot of LFO on, well, it can be phaser, but also a lot on the volume itself as well. So the sounds are kind of coming in and moving around. I will stop there because I'm ranting. Razi, go.
Well, my mind is kind of reeling on semantics now because the language we're using is so interesting. But Brett, you really piqued my interest and triggered something that I'd been thinking and trying to refine nicely a moment ago. When you pointed out that if the function of this element when you're designing it is to carry the rhythmic information of the song, that's less of a pad. We don't use the word pad for something that's pulsing and carrying the rhythm. So it's like one of the points that I think I missed on describing some of these sound design techniques. Like once you put the reverb after them and it becomes pad-like in that it is not carrying the rhythm of the song, the drums can still be banging away, but the pad's function is to fill the space between the things. And it gets back to this idea of, is it drone-like? Is it chaos noise-like? And those are elements that can pad out the space, but the classic pad is carrying melodic or harmonic information. It's got pitch. It's doing some of those functions. And did you want to jump in on that, Brett?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a misunderstanding a little bit, because where I'm using like the Bode Crotales, for example, is when I have something that is really heavily rhythm dense, and it's because it is more of like a Bode kind of bowl sound, you know, and it's that thing that shimmers, and you know, you can sit there and play with, like Carl's talking about, the modulation of the LFOs and whatnot, so that it still carries the tonal parts that you want. And then the other point to that is like chaos tracks, where I'm literally creating a more chaos-like environment, and then using that as a trigger environment.
I think those are super useful distinctions, and I don't certainly mean anything critical about the way that you're thinking about it, but it's difficult to sort out some of like we talk as if the word pad already has a meaning and we're filling in for how to make one, but we're trying to describe the things that we're making using a lot of words. And I really appreciate your terms of the chaos and noise. And one other design element came to mind as you were talking about it, and that's when you do have an environmental sound that's got, say, a percussive element. That's not pad-like. However, if you've got a granular sample player to put it into, there may be just enough duration to get some grains flying around, and now the tail of that with the reverb and the attack of that, those do have very different tonalities, so you can scroll through with a grain or maybe a few grains and get a lot of areas of that timbre shift and build something that is a little bit more complex, and maybe there's enough of it that you can get a tone out of it, and then maybe feed that into the reverb and play while you're playing chords on it, and that could also be a super interesting pad-like thing. And it may remove some of the original character of the environment that you found it in, but you've grown from what's a percussive thing into a pad thing using granular techniques. I like doing that.
Thank you. I just want to, I'll throw this to Ivan in a moment. Just 3 words to absolutely back up what Brent is saying, because pads are fantastic, just like pants. Am I painting with these? Am I hunting humans with these? Am I going into a business meeting? And the one example of the most wonderful pads ever, 3 words, to Dark Park. And that, when we start to, we're really getting into what you're talking about there, and just, oh God, there is using sound that is and I was asked to touch on, this is a really interesting thing. No, you know what? It's not my turn. Ivan, I want to hear your thoughts, and thank you both. I didn't mean to anything. Ivan, go. This is you.
Yeah, I gotta second that. Too Dark Park, the use of pads in that album is fucking amazing. I would. Is it mostly the Kurzweil that's doing the heavy lifting there for them?
Emacs.
Or okay. Yeah, I mean, this was back in the day when like that would have been a kind of still a big deal. Also, Vivisect, that album also definitely, like, they showed off that they knew what they were doing. And then like Too Dark Park was the master class. But yeah, we keep talking about using LFOs for pads. And I'm going to go back to like my love of modular, because it's easy there. ADSR envelopes to act as the LFO, you get a few more options, because you're doing ADSR instead of just an LFO. Like an LFO is like good. It's very competent at it, but an ADSR envelope can be a little more crazy. And I like, like a little more crazy upon occasion, at least. Also, Mark, you've got sitting behind you an Op6. The Op6 is really good at generating pads. It's also very good at leads, but like both of those things are kind of in its core competency. I don't like the Op6 so much for like poly keys so much, but like leads and pads, like, very nice.
Yeah, I actually stumbled into a really, well, whether it's a drone or a pad is debatable given the conversation, but I did stumble into one of my favorite ones on the Op6.
Yeah, no, I've got some.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've got a collection of like I went like out of my way and actually like bought a preset pack for the Op6 that is primarily kind of patty, but they're all really good, so I really like it. And like the value, also the value of syncing up to clock cannot be understated with pads, because if you're not in clock, it will get really obvious really fast.
Unless it's a really, really diffuse pad, then nobody will ever know. Mark, do you mind jumping back in and just describing this one that you stumbled on a little bit? Just to flesh that out.
Yeah, what do you like about it?
Put some words on that. Paint us a word picture of the sound.
I will try to. It's been a long time since I've heard it. I just remember really liking it. I think it was. I don't remember how I stumbled. Okay, so I was working on a like ambient track, and I wanted something that kind of gave the vague feeling of exploring the halls of the Nostromo from Alien, and that's the one I stumbled into, and like. I kept coming back to it like, oh, I should probably add something to this, but I think in the end it was just the Op 6 and a thing that I'm not going to talk about. And that was like the entire everything, just modulating that. And I was like, this doesn't really need drums, it doesn't need a lead, it's fine how it is. It's just texture, and it's great for that. Um but yeah, I don't I feel like I was really just twisting knobs until I found something that sounded nice. So I don't really have a lot I can say about it.
That's how we do. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciated that. As soon as you said Nostromo, I'm in. Which Skinny Puppy sampled the shit out of. Adapt, manipulate. Thank you for asking about samples, and this is also along the lines of what Brett was saying as well. So, the incredible thing about Too Dark Park, which is a great takeaway, is when you listen musically to what the pads are playing in that album, they are playing a different song to the bass line and everything else. And they're different times, and it might be a 4-second loop, but because and it's looping at a different phase to the song, and everything's out. And it's the same thing when you listen to like hip hop, gangster rap hip hop is like they have a trumpet and it's a trumpet solo or something, or it's based on a Rhodes piano thing. They are not musically at all tied to the to what's going on with the bass line and everything else. My point being is that when you listen to Too Dark Park and other albums that utilize this kind of concept in early sampling, and it is early sampling because modern sampling goes, oh, that's out of tune. Don't worry, I'll automatically put that in tune for you. I don't fucking want that. You are now introducing elements into the song that are completely outside of the expected neurological, the chords that I'm coming up with. Nah, this is somewhere else now. And in doing so, you are introducing elements of emotion, elements of thought that are not something you'd normally come up with. And therefore the listener is listening to it, and suddenly the entire thing becomes dislocated. There's a lot of industrial music, 88, 85 to 2000-ish earlier, that this is what it did. And it's and that's when you start, like, there's pads where you know what you're doing. And what's fantastic is that everything we've spoken about up to this point has been, I know exactly what I'm doing here, blah, 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 and I'm playing these extended chords and da-da-da, and that's great. We haven't got to the musicality yet. But then there's something like what Brett's talking about, which is I'm going to make a whole bunch of noise in my room and I'm going to walk around with a fucking microphone. That's very good, Brett. I like that. I approve of that. And I'm going to see what, comes up with, because the story with Too Dark Park is they were sampling shortwave radio, and there's drones and whistles and all sorts of things that could be used as something that has pitch or doesn't. And that became this incredibly magical fucking thing. Like, Angelspit has always built instruments. Angelspit has often either played them live or sampled them in the recording. And you get drastically different results when you build an instrument and play it, because I'm a crap player, versus building an instrument and sampling it. And then you do all of this fucking weird shit. But back to the point is that when you start utilizing samples and stuff that have elements in it that are non-musical, and Depeche Mode does this as well. Like, you know, a lot of the samples they use on the main melodies, they've got really strong harmonics that are giving the suggestion of the sound being two notes. And that's so that there's the fundamental dum 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 dum. That was the worst scale I've ever done in my life. Then there's this other note that's playing a harmonic, and it's not really a fifth and it's not really a flat fifth. It's somewhere in between the two because it's a piece of metal, and that's just where the harmonic was because of the size of the piece of metal and everything else. And when you play a melody on a piano, it makes you feel this way. But when you play that melody on that piece of metal sample, it makes you feel this way. And when you're playing those nice pads or that one single finger thing on a piano, it makes you feel this way. But when you play that weird fucking thing that you stole from Debussy or Wagner or someone scraping a metal pipe, which is full of harmonics, and there's kind of a note in there, but you don't know what it is, it makes you feel this way. And that's the fantastic thing about when you start messing with sounds and you start messing with samplers and you don't allow the computer to, and when you play any of those on a piano that's out of tune, oh God, out of tune pianos. Brett, you're a man after my own heart. Out of tune pianos have got songs in them, man, I'm telling you. Because just remember that your brain has been forcefully wired to get itself around equal temperament. You don't naturally have equal temperament. That's mathematics. The brain normally goes into all of these different harmonic, it wants to hear a harmonic scale. And what's incredible and liberating about when things start going out of tune is it has this incredible emotional response that you've got to utilize. That if you want to start really, like in ambient music, setting people free, or industrial music making them feel fucking creeped out or whatever, it's not C, F, G. You're not going to do it like that. You have to go into the darkness away from the out of tune pianos, baby. I'm telling you. So when, back to samplers, if you take a part of an orchestra, for example, and it might be just a string playing something, and then there's a slight, the strings come up behind it or something, whatever it is you find, and you loop it and it's this long, and as the chords and everything and the melodies going on under it, this thing is going to be providing this very strange thing that adds this dimension, layer to your music that you didn't think of. And that's what makes it great. So if you've got a song, and I do this with Angelspit and Planet 9000, is you start simple and then you bring in the samples. And the great thing about samplers, specifically Emacs, and the Emulator 4, but I like the Emacs better, is that they are going to introduce a language, an interpretation that is totally not what you were expecting. And that's fucking awesome. I'm not saying anything else on this because I'm just tired of my voice. Does anybody else want to throw in there about going into the world of, gee, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing right now? If you are inspired or if you have experience in doing that, Brett, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So like I mentioned earlier, I think pads almost go hand in hand with effects when you start talking about bringing in real world effects bringing in like real world sounds. So any sound can be padded, as Raziel correctly stated. There are certain characteristics that you typically see, and when you start talking about effects, of course you're still trying to fill that space uniquely, but rarely do you want that thing to be uninteresting in and of its own right. It's the whole purpose behind, a synthesizer having, you press down the one key, it does all these modulations and you get different sounds out of it. And for me, one of the things I like to do is take a lot of things and just reverse them. If you add a little bit of room reverb, not like big droning, whatever, but something that just allows it to be the space that this thing belongs in, you can start doing some really neat things with other effects. You start talking about side chaining then, and I would almost classify it as building a synthesizer out of a sound. Because at the end of it, when you've taken that thing and you've ripped it apart 9 ways from Sunday, and you now have a single source of sound that might be pure and clean on this channel, it may never actually be heard. It's probably, for me, powering 6 other channels, all doing something different to that. And that's something I can do on a DAW that I can't necessarily do as easily or as well. But the thing it brings to the table are things that people already hear in real life. So, if you go to any public place, or I don't care, go outside, stay in your house, whatever, there's a background noise, and that's what that pad is. It's something about it that describes the environment. We're playing with fictional settings in a lot of fictional worlds in a lot of games, and a lot of it is kind of sci-fi-ish. So there's no reason not to bring in these alien noises, and part of the way I was describing even in the chat is, you take something familiar and you make it just unfamiliar enough so that you have to struggle a little bit to figure out what you're hearing. Another example of that is when I was a kid, and I still use it to this day, my sister was kind enough to give me a Scream sample. Here's a microphone, scream for me, sis. And of course, my parents came running downstairs. Brett, what are you doing to your sister? No, we're having fun, really. Anyway, because I've used that a lot in the past, I don't want to use it in a way that's recognizable. But nonetheless, it has those tones that I was talking about earlier. And it's a good tone. It's like a tea kettle, but human enough to cut through on the highs and become something that can sit just under the mix and kind of brighten it, brighten the tone of the overall mix, right? And so I'll rip that thing into shreds, and then I'll stitch them back together until it's a straight up tone that's more uniform, round off the edges, and now you've got something completely different out of that bass sound. And so I think when we're talking about pads, I think you really do have to take into consideration what you can do with effects. And often, just like the 10-second delay and the reverb, these effects are going to be that thing that helps it define its character as a pad.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a great segue for us to start talking about effects. Just before we do, I will say thank you for the Scream. A trick I love is if you are recording with a piano, like a real actual piano, hold down the keys. Don't actually strike them. Just hold them down so the piano, the hammers are up off the keys, and scream at the piano right into the strings. And the strings will copy the harmonic color of your voice and resonate accordingly. It's very, very quiet, but it's freaky as fuck. Razi, tell me about effects.
I was just gonna double up on your piano suggestion there. If you just hold down the sustain pedal, and if you happen to be lucky enough with a piano with a piezo pickup and you don't need to mic the thing, you can actually get just the piano verb off of the piezos. So sustain pedal down, loudspeaker near the thing, resonant strings will get excited sympathetically by the air, and you get an isolation because it's magnetically picking up the vibration of the strings, not acoustically in the room, so you get a really good isolation. So this the Yamaha CP70, or if your piano is outfitted with a piezo pickup strip, those are a lot less sensitive to the air and much more sensitive to contact motion. So you can do the same thing with any cheap piezo pickups also. So if you happen to want to rig this up on your regular piano, you can glue or stick a couple of contact mics, piezo mics inside the piano and get similar isolation. Very cool idea, Carl. I have not actually done this in maybe 15, 20 years, but I
fun.
will now that you mention it.
Awesome. So when it comes to effects, what do you like? Talk to me.
I'm a go through every algo in the verb kind of person. So, you know, my go-tos, we're talking pads, so reverb comes up. I mean, it's not a surprise that you might put some reverb as your effect on a long pad. But I'm the Lexicon 480L is the big, famous, amazing sort of turning point for digital reverbs, and I have a new verb card in an old Mac, and I go to that for some of the algorithms within it, just because they have a way of scattering the sound and turning it into something lovely and delicious and not distracting because the resonances are sweet. But absolutely all of the algorithmic verbs that are done by Valhalla DSP, including EOS from Audio Damage, they just turn things into random chaos in a smooth, pleasing way. They also have clangy algorithms too, but if we happen to be just going through same sound into this algorithm, change this algorithm, change this algorithm, just going through and listening so you know what the devices are capable of. Yeah, that's kind of a non-answer, more about my habits for getting to know what I've got. But it makes me stick to something predictable from the Valhalla verbs and from the new verb, and that's definitely the one that I go to. Those are the two that I go to.
Stunning. Thank you very much. Brett, what are your thoughts?
All right, so again, it does depend, but some of my favorites are a granulizer VST, G-Grain. What I like about it is it allows me to take any sound and, of course, just make it a little bit more buzzy. That's at a simple scale. I also use that same thing for vocal effects because you can dial it up, and it's good at creating a demonic voice, really. The other thing I've really been liking a lot lately is actually a VST M Rhythmizer. So I'll chain it with another effect that is actually a sort of a spectral filter. Is the best way to describe it. And what you can do is you can take part of the EQ spectrum, cut it up, and say you go here, you go here, you go here. And then I'll take those and run them through various other chains until I have something that you can no longer recognize as the original source. Now, on a more simplistic level, one of the things that I really like are choirs as pads. So I have an old school, it's not a VST, it's actually a sound font. And so of Papal Media Choir, Papal Boys Choir, actually. So what I'll do with that, for example, is I'll actually run it through a reverb that has, a very good default cathedral setting. And it fills out the room nicely in that regard. And then, of course, you can just use that in the background like you would a choir, or you can then, add any kind of delay you want to it, break that out, and force it to do kick flips. The other things I like are stereo wideners and exciters. Exciters are an old FM technology. They used to use that on radio stations. That was one of the reasons. Like some of the radio stations had big sound. Apologies for the dogs. But that was how they got. That was actually what they did to the vinyl. Before they put it out, they ran it through a low-level exciter and split the. What it does is it acts as a sort of stereo widener in a sense, but it does it also with frequencies. It's kind of like a blend a compressor with some stereo effects. All of those I find are good when you chain those together. Not only can you take any sound that you started with and make it unrecognizable, but you can make it drone. You can also go the other direction and make it very rhythmic, and that's where I say it starts becoming more like synthesis at that point. You're literally taking a source input and applying whatever modulation you want to it.
Absolutely, darling. Thank you so much. Razi, go.
At the risk of getting less pad-like and more rhythmic, I would like to nominate vocoder as a god tier effect to put on your pad. The pad is the carrier, and a old school breakbeat drum loop is your modulator. So let's say it's the funky drummer. Clyde's gonna open up your silence every time a drum hit happens with some tonality of his drum kit imposed upon the full spectrum sound of your synth pads, and you will get something that I cannot describe in words, but it is rich and full of motion. And you can then refuck that up and make it more pad-like with lots of delays and reverbs if you want to feed it back into smoothing it out.
I think that's great. Thank you. And another really fun thing you can do with vocoders is not just voices, but also scraping of metal. Anything that's got a really weird harmonic thumbprint, and that's going to make a vocoder do weird things.
Yeah, it is just a filter bank, a very high resolution responsive filter bank after all. So you can impose one sound of one thing spectrum wise on another.
My thoughts on effects is firstly experiment with none. Because like if you're doing like really driving industrial music, perhaps no effects on your samples might be a really nice thing. It's going to yield a very confronting sound. Reverb is great for smoothing things up, but sometimes you don't want to do that. And the big decider thing is like with reverb, how does it make me feel? What is this song about? What is the energy and mood of this song? And is this effect adding to it or subtracting to it? So having said that, once you've got your lovely pad going, people love distortion. And maybe distortion is more of a drone thing, but I'm going to end with my thing. People go, I want to get the idea out there. Some people will go distortion into reverb, and that's great. Why don't you try reverb into distortion? Because the great thing about reverb is when it's tailing out, the distortion is going to be picking up on a whole bunch of different harmonics that you're not expecting. And if it's just one note, distortion, reverb into distortion might be really, really good. One go-to I use all the time on my reverb, and I can never say this, is the Noise Engineering Desmodus Versio, the reverb, the bat reverb. It's the best reverb I've ever fucking heard. So good. Yeah, another really fun thing to do is be open to the idea of modulating your reverb. Because we've been talking about modulating synthesizers and stuff. You know, if you put a big bucket brigade delay on something because you want it to be fat, modulate that. If you've got a delay going on, if you can ever so slightly or not, modulate it, and you're going to make it supremely fat. What does your, sounds that are modulating and they're not reverberating, for example, flanges or phases are a great way to introduce alien spacey zones to things. So if you've got this really cool industrial metal thing or vocoder thing that's going on and you want to make it spacey, but reverb is too meh, flange it or phase it. Basically, fuck around and find out. So that means you need to give yourself time to muck around. Let's keep talking about more. Does anybody else have any effects thoughts they want to throw into this mix? Where the fuck is Alex? Where's he go?
As you were describing putting the distortion at the end of the verb tail, I was like, yeah, that's the crunchiness. But also putting your bit depth reduction like down to like 4 bits or some shit down at the end, and like take all the dynamics out of it also after that with a really hard limiter or something, so that your quietest noises are all the way loud, and then just bring the gain down so you're not ruining stuff like your ears. But that way, your reverb tails, maybe you've got a percussive sound that you're turning into a pad. The reverb tails turn into these, well, they start out as smooth decays. Then your bit reduction after it, when it gets down to the quietest parts in the dither, the bit reduced, bit crusher is going to make that turn into the most gritty crunchiness that you can possibly imagine. And then you can then bring that volume back up so that those are also loud and present, and then you can repadify that with either granular or another reverb or something, or just leave it crunchy, but the texture, that's, yeah, there's super stuff down in those glitches that go back into some of Brett's chaos stuff, where these things are just not related to the chord or timbre of the patch that you played, but they're the resulting detritus of all the crap that you did to it later.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just it is a continuation of fucking around. And yes, watch a video on somebody doing something totally weird, or how we did this album in the 70s or 80s or something, or watch the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. Be inspired to try somewhere there, and then off you go. Does anybody else want to jump in on effects, or do we now want to talk about the actual musicality of our pads and ideas for the actual notes that you were playing and the way you were playing it? Yes. Okay, I'm going to go first. I love it when I'm doing pads. Your fingers are doing this. Not moving very much. There it is. Because it's going from, white inversion to some inversion to some inversion. So shit's not moving very much. Do you understand what I'm doing when I'm saying? Like, if I look like, don't play it like that. Don't fucking do that. Yeah. We want to do moving, nice things that are all thing. But the thing about it is that every 6-8 bars or so, the bottom finger goes to the top. So things are slowly moving up, or they're slowly moving down. Another fun thing to do is they don't have to hit on the one. What you could do is, and I mentioned before as well, is that if the sound's got velocity to attack, so the harder you hit it, the faster the attack is. Everything's slow, but you actually start playing one of the notes, the top note, for example, half a bar early. And then the second one is a beat early. So they're going nyam, nyam, like that. So everything's sliding around like this. Another fun thing is as well is you might want to assign to have portamento between the notes. So they're actually sliding up to each other. Something I love doing is that if I can pitch bend from one note to another, for example, in Ice Planet 9000, I love doing this because I hate doing it, so I've decided that I have to fucking do it. If I'm going from like F to E, like F major to E major, I'll just use the pitch bend. And then when it goes to the next note, I'll strike the note and then return it. So it goes, like that. So there's all of these unexpected things that happens in it. I don't know if I made that clear. Do I have to say that again? So if chords or note are moving semitonally or by within a pitch bending range, pitch bend. So stuff is really smooth. And that's going to work really nicely if there's not a whole bunch of shit going on and you don't hear it, because it's a good trick. Razi, what do you think about life?
You made me think about how to approach the voice leading within the chords that you're building. And some people have the dexterity to play that on piano and keep your notes close instead of spreading them way out and having them feel unrelated. But the other way to approach this is if you're looking at your piano scroll and you're drawing in your notes, maybe you're doing 4 notes at a time, maybe you're just doing 3. But watch the way that they relate with each other and don't let them cross so much. You know, like keep your high notes playing a high part, keep your middle range notes playing the middle part, and keep your middle notes playing the lower part. And you will find, rather than just moving the entire thing around in blocks, you're doing these naturally occurring chord inversion things that Carl was talking about, which on your hand on a piano, you're keeping the notes close together instead of spreading them out and just jumping your hand around to the root, third and fifth. You're building voice leading. But on the piano scroll, you can do the same thing. You can just watch, make sure the notes are staying close, listen, see if it sounds like the chord that you wanted, and move the notes not as leapwise for a little while so that they're doing smaller motions, and just watch that they're not, if you can follow the path, that there's one path for each of them in the middle and that they don't cross a lot. And it's a quick way to do, standard classical sonata allegro format exposition, not voice crossing kind of stuff that you may or may not have learned one semester in college and then forgotten. But it's a chordal density for the pads to let them adhere and cohere as a structural element instead of just spreading out all over the whole thing.
Thank you also. Adapt, manipulate, just FYI, pitch bending as in portamento, no. So I'm actually talking about the wheel, the pitch bending wheel itself, that if the notes are allowing you to actually move the entire chord up or down, do it. You get a really, and mine's always set to a semitone, make it a really smooth, nice glide up. And I take about half a bar to go up, then half a bar to come down. Also use portamento. Not as well as, but as an alternative to use portamento. Razi, thank you for what you just said. Another fun thing to do is also, if you take, so you're playing your chord like that, if you take this finger here and drop it an octave, so it's like that, there's more open feeling. So the most between each note's like a fifth or a fourth or so. You're going to get some more fifth. Oh, the minimum amount, because everything's spread out, it might become a very pretty thing that's worth trying. And alternatively, another thing, if you've got like you might have two sounds, and you take the bottom two and you put that on that sound, and then you take the top two, but you drop this one down an octave, and you put that on the other sound. So the pads, there's two pads that are working together. And the cool thing about that is this pad, because it's two notes, isn't saying major or minor, it's just saying two notes. And this pad over here isn't technically saying major or minor either, it's just saying two notes. But when the two are mixing together, the conversation they're having is saying major or minor. Fuck around. Does anybody else want to jump in? Razi, your hand.
Yes, further to your pitch bend and portamento discussion, if you're on a Buchla style multi-touch thing, or maybe your tablet has a synth on it like the Moog stuff, or you have a Rolly Seaboard kind of thing, I don't know if all of those are polyphonic, I know a couple of them are, you can do some pretty sickening stuff with just sliding your fingers between the chord voicings, and all the notes in between are part of what you're playing now, and you can be out of tune, and you can change the threshold at which these controllers will snap you to the pitch. But if you just leave it free, you can do this like fretless style, really free tuning kind of chordal stuff. Good luck doing that, but man, it's cool. Like if you spread the keyboard out enough on, I know the touch interface on the Moog synth that I have on iPad, for instance, allows you to spread the keyboard out and also include the notes that are in the mode that you want to use, or do it chromatically. So there's a lot of ways of approaching this. But the point being, Carl's pitch bending and sliding, you can do this manually just by moving your fingers around on the surface. And it can be very nauseating and weird. And then the other thing, this may be throwing it off topic a little bit for where you were going, Carl and Brett, but or maybe it's just simple, break the sounds up between different synths. So if you're in the piano roll and you're looking at your notes and you've got a successful top line that's kind of cohesive, just select that, maybe drag it on a different track, or set that pitch range to play through a different synth, or select your things and break them up. So you've got maybe 3 notes playing, but each of them is on a different synth with a slightly different timbre or a different patch or something like that. And it'll still be pad-like, but you'll get some sort of interesting stereo decoherence, or however you choose to process it later.
Love it. Thank you so much. Brett, what do you think?
So yeah, I agree with all of that. I don't have much to add other than the pitch bend. There's multiple ways to get to that, and multiple ways to express that. This, for example, is a breath controller. Allows the old school Yamaha, works with my DX7, which I'm actually pulling out of retirement to use that on again. The other is a ribbon controller. That's this guy right here. The same sort of things you're talking about with all the chord progressions, you're there, and then you hit a ribbon controller. One of the nice things about this one is it kind of lets you do some of the things that are native to guitars, sort of the tapping, where you can hold a root note and then tap your way down. Also allows you to do things that are native to guitars with the vibrato and whatnot with your fingers. The breath controller, if you have anyone who's familiar with playing with wind instruments, it's going to be one of those things that's going to allow them to do that. I forget what the term is called, but the intonation, I guess, with the tongue and everything else, and the shape of the mouth. A lot of that stuff can come through that as well, of course. And that's really the point. Is some of these other controllers are just a good way to do the same things we're talking about here in ways that are maybe more comfortable, native, or curious.
Okay, that's like yummy. Thank you. Another thought is that if you've got a sample that's going on, like if your loop is coming from a sample, and it might be just all you have to do is hold down one finger on that sample because it's this crazy big fucking thing. You make it monophonic, and you make the glide between one and the other. Oh my God, fucking go away, Nortons. The glide between one might be like whatever that is, so that as it's moving from one key center to the next, it's moving with it. And remember, the great thing about samples is that if there's any kind of rhythmic thing going on, you play it lower, it gets slower. You play it higher, it gets faster. That shit is so cool. Also, if you do have a sample, whether it be scraping metal or fucking orchestra, when you start playing fifths and sixths, thirds might be too tight, but maybe they'll work. When you play a chord, a really simple chord, not only is the sample, because of the different pitch, firing at different times, like looping at different speeds, but also if there's harmonic content in that sample, you get this really amazing stacked chord thing going on. Like the orchestra might be going C, E, G. Well, that's great when you're playing C and you're in the key of C, but if you've got a third in there, which is your E, it's going E, G sharp, B. Oh, wow. That's crazy. But then when you throw a fucking G in there as well, it's going G, this is trying me out, B, D. So you've got this massive fucking spread. And it's the most interesting thing, like when you start fucking with that shit. Okay, that's all I got. Wow, the chat's going off right now.
Things devolved.
They did. Pitch manipulation with an 8-bit sampler is incredible. Absolutely agreed. You're going to get a beautiful sound when you start going lower. You're going to get that crunch. God, hail the crunch. Love that crunch. Funny. Okay. And yes, adapt, manipulate. The takeaway is creative pitch bending yields incredible results. Yes, synths and samplers do magic shit when you pitch bend them in real time. Absolutely. Because you don't know what the fuck's going on, and your brain goes, "Whoa, what just happened?" So if you do that, your listener's going to do that too, baby. Oh yeah. Does anybody else want to jump in at this stage, or do we want to change the subject about pads, or do we want to talk about something completely different? We could talk about gear. Oh, Ivan's smiling. Guys, fucking seriously? Okay, well, all right. So I'm using a synth currently, and it's amazing. And one thing I'm trying to do with this synth is I can set up a sequence. But then what I'm trying to do is set up one voice, that sequence, and it's a big pad. This is ambient shit. And the sequence that's being played, I'll let you know, is, and if you got a keyboard handy, you can play this out, is F, E, D flat, A flat, C. F, E, D flat, A flat, C. So it's a 5-note sequence, and that they're weird notes. Oh look, weird notes. Ice Planet 9000 weird notes. There you go. Great, very nice scale because of the chords that fit over that beautifully. When you start playing a sequence like that, it makes everything weird. So it's like saying, we're going to have a weird conversation. We're going to go somewhere weird now. That's what those notes say. So in the pad, what I'm trying to do is have one of the oscillators play that, and it might be a beat, it might be a 30-second. I don't know the speed of it. Meanwhile, the other keys are playing what I'm playing. And the great thing about the Moog one is that if 3 notes are if you're playing a 3-note chord, each of those notes has 3 oscillators on it. And if that, so that means that there are 3 oscillators that are 3 voices that are actually playing that thing. And if you've got oscillator slop going on, then that's even fatter. So not only is that sequencer chirping away, but you're also modulating the sequence that it's the oscillator itself. Is this boring? So it's going between like a triangle and a ramp. So it sounds like it's a frequency thing. And wait, there's more. We're also running that through a ring modulator. So it's ring modulating with whatever notes are playing. So it's not just the one note, it's all of this fucking cacophony that's going on. And you're modulating the volume of the actual sequence separately, and you're also modulating the ring modulator itself. So the normal one's up, the ring mod's down, then they're both up, then the ring mod's up, butter. And you get something really fucking dreamy and crazy. Brett, help, because this isn't making any sense whatsoever. People are just nodding because they're being polite.
No, I was flowing with you. So I was going to say that, you know, if you take it out of the context of pads, almost everything we've said here still applies. And especially when you start taking these same sounds and then deciding to turn them into, or say, a bass or a treble instrument, you know, or a drum or anything. And when you start taking those same chords and instead of playing them as, you know, something droning and kind of moving in the background, and start picking them out, you can really start messing with the sound overall. You can sit there and say, literally, the third note goes to this effect, and that effect every now and then detunes it by X amount. Or sends it to the left ear, or puts it in space and time. And I don't know. I think all those things, you know, are kind of married skills together. In my world, I see it more in the DAW than I do on anything else. But yeah.
Okay, so since I was just nodding along politely because I got lost in what Carl was just saying, I would like to be brought back down to earth. And what's our synth patch weirdness with notes? How does that actually relate? Or alternately, how does a ring modulator work? Go. Who's got it?
So it's been a minute since I've played with a ring modulator, but and I'm not gonna profess to be an expert on how it works, but I can kind of give you a description of what it sounds like. It's like adding a harmonic with a little bit of fuzz on it. And so it gives you a kind of robot-y sort of voice without it being that overpowering robot.
Oh, the overpowering robots are the real winners here, though, aren't they?
That's right. That's where you need the vocoder.
Noted. My understanding is that it is a multiplicative effect when you do shit with a ring mod. So the frequencies of one sound are multiplied by the other, either digitally or voltage wise, which the effect is then something that is not harmonically related. So you get something super atonal, a lot higher. And depending on the multiplier frequency, maybe there's a third number involved here because there is another knob on most ring modulators. You can change what that atonality is somewhat unpredictably and chaotically. So anybody who hasn't tried putting ring modulation on what started out as something that sounds nice, sounds good, like a pretty tone, you can generally ruin that pretty fast.
Yes.
Using ring modulation. And that was my takeaway, Carl, from everything you said.
So here's a fun thing, is if you've got a melody that you like the melody line, but it's not working for some reason, and remember, as Rezi said, the ring modulator is, it's taking the harmonic content of the sound. So that, and it's basically adding them together. So if it's if you're using square teeth, it's going to be a different shape, color result to if you're using triangles or ramps or something, or a sample. If you've got a melody and the melody works, but it's not gritty enough, put it through a ring modulator. So it's ring modulating with a drone. And as you play the note, it's playing this ring modulated thing. And Angelspit did that in a track. I think it was Dead Letter. I don't remember. Dope's got a really good and cheap ring modulator. But the interesting thing about ring modulators, you'll sound like Devo very quickly. Devo's secret weapon in the first couple of albums with ring modulators, there's two different types. One is an additive ring modulator and another one is a subtractive. So it'll get the two and it will subtract the difference from the top one. And I think there's a third one as well. But they're fucking great. And the interesting thing about using them in pads is they will result in, they get gritty and ringy. And you can use that to your advantage if you want shine happening in stuff. I actually wanted to talk about, if you guys are into it, sequences. And when I say sequences, I don't mean Cubase or fucking bricks on a screen. I'm talking about an actual sequence within the keyboard. Do you use them? Because I've always thought that I wanted to use them, but I never do. And when I say sequence, I mean like the 8-step, 16-step sequence that you can use in a keyboard. I often use them in a modular. I never use them on a keyboard. Never, never, never. And I'm trying to change that now because the Moog One is so ridiculously fucking incredibly strong at its sequences. Brett, I love you. Thank you so much for being part of this, man. Thank you for being part of this. I never use it and I should be using it. So do you sequence? Are we not men? We are sequences. Razi, hit me.
Yeah, not a lot because it's a pretty specific application by synthesizer, but JX3P, step sequencer, step, step, step. You can tie the notes or put a rest in. And I don't routinely have my JX3P out of the closet, let alone hooked up to something that's going to run the steps, drive the steps according to clock. But it's fairly simple. You can put pretty much anything into the input. If it's got enough voltage, it'll ping the next step. And then also the Pro 1, more likely because it's always there and there is something in the clock in. And you can also drive it from the internal LFO. And you can do some stuff with like step, 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 and then turn it up fast so it's doing something kind of not quite into the audio frequency range, but starting to sound like a new tonality built out of the notes that you just put in. A little chiptune-y sounding, but so not in the traditional sense very frequently where, okay, now I've got a bass line because I step sequenced it in my synth's built-in step sequencer, but in some sound design senses, a little bit once in a while. It's there.
Interesting. Thank you. Ivan.
Yeah, I play with the sequencer on the Take Five all the time because it's good. It makes sense. It does a good job. Um, the Pro One sequencer is kind of the gold standard of what sequencers should act like. The Take Five is pretty close to it. Well, I occasionally use the sequencer on my big Roland, but the Take Five primarily is one I go to. Um, you like it, getting and keeping all the clocks synced up amongst the various bits of hardware can become a bit of a pain in the ass upon occasion. At which point, like if it gets important, if like I'm working on like actually converting it to a song, it's gonna end up in Ableton anyways. So I might as well just be in Ableton and move the blocks around. Because then it's more easily reproducible. Like the thing with a step sequencer on your keyboard is like you've got to program the step sequencer for a song, and like now you're just doing like IT management with your keyboards.
Thank you. Okay, what I want to do is I want to actually pull it into a different mindset of what I'm getting at is that, okay, so for the Moog 1, what you can do, and also you can do this on the Rev 2, and I'm pretty sure you can do this on I think the Hydrosynth has a sequencer on it. I think you can, no, okay. You can do it on the Roland, on Mark's Roland, I think, where you can say, I'm going to set up a sequencer track, and it might be notes, or it might be controllers, or it might be whatever, so that as I hold a note down and that sequence is going to be affecting those notes. I can set up a sequence to make it sound like it's a Korg wave station or something that's, doing that big gurgly thing. The great thing about doing that as opposed to doing it in on the door is that I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And that building a big rhythmic sequence drum thing on the modular is something I always used to do, because it's like, I'm going to take this one and it's 5 steps. I'm going to take this one, it's 8 steps, and they're going to start Fibonacciing over the top of each other. Then I'm going to take this one, it's fucking 11 steps. Then there's going to be a 4 on the floor under the whole thing. So it's going to be molding everything together. That's the kind of sequence that I'm talking about. I'm not actually talking about sequencing. I'm talking about sequencing like it's 1978. And how you can use that to begin building ideas and pads or drums or alternative to drums or percussive lines or loops or anything like that using kafuckery. Because the other great thing about the fucking Moog 1 and the Rev 2 and several others is you can also be saying, well, I'm going to be changing the amount of FM on this one. I'm going to be literally changing it as it goes. So you're getting some really beautiful sounds or butt ugly fucking sounds. Rezi, what do you think?
I hope this isn't the wrong direction to be thinking in, but the one of the features when you're sitting in front of the keyboard and you're just there and it's got a sequencer and you do something with it, like that's pretty much the threshold, because every component of this, whether it's a control voltage to make your filters modulate in the modular or change your ring mod frequencies, there's more flexibility to do it in the control strip or whatever on your DAW. So there's got to be something inspirational about the interface anyway, something that makes you just want to, okay, I'm going to pluck this out. And I think, Carl, what you're getting at is musically, like, for example, on the 3P, if you put in a sequence of notes, you can then transpose that sequence by pressing down keys. And you've got something that you might have to spend some time wiring up on your DAW, but it's immediately there on the synth. So if you're in the moment and you're getting ideas and you go like, let's just say it's root in an octave to keep it really simple, and you've got that thing going doom ba doom ba doom ba. At least you can then, transpose that, and now you've got a quick arpeggiator playing, and it's a sequence that you wrote, so you can do root third octave or root fifth octave, boom ba bam, and now you can do a little. It's if you've got an arpeggiator already built into your thing, who cares? But it's a sequencer, so now you can do root third, fifth, suspended second. You can do something interesting, but you can do it musically by blocking out the chords. Again, fine line between step sequencing on your synth because you're there and it having an arpeggiator built in to do it. But the ideas, they happen when you do this stuff.
Yes. Thank you. We were talking before about with a pad and you're making an LFO do this and an LFO, and before you know it, you're out of LFOs. That's why sequencers are really handy, because you can set up a sequencer to say, well, it's not going to be an LFO, and it's going to move from one step to the next step every bar. And the first step might be minus 100, then it might be go to plus 100, then it'll go to 50. And so it's going to create this really strange shape over 11 bars or something. And you're going to put a great big slew on it. So, and you'll assign that to the volume of that oscillator, or the wave shape of that oscillator, or whatever it is. And they're really great ways to be modulating stuff. Like, unfortunately, you cannot on the Moog 1, which is something I have a massive fucking problem with. You can't modulate the effects of a Moog 1. Can you believe that? You can on the Rev 2, though. I know it's total bullshit. So on your Rev 2, you can be saying, I'm going to set up a sequence that's going 2 tracks, and 1 track is going to be controlling the wet-dry mix of the reverb. Unfortunately, the reverb on the Rev 2 is not that amazing. Whereas on the Moog 1, it's fucking stellar. But you can't do you notice Carl's getting that angry voice that he only gets when he's talking about the Moog 1? So you're on your Rev 2 or something else, and one line is saying how loud the reverb is, and the other track on your 4-step sequencer is saying how long the reverb is. Because that's front 242 Headhunter. That was a constant modulating of the length of the reverb. That's how they got that sound. It wasn't just a DX7, it was also this beautiful thing that they were doing on a piece of shit fucking Yamaha Rev 5 or whatever. But you can do that sort of thing as well. And then when you start doing this stuff and you're playing chords or basses over it, it sounds like wave shaping. It sounds like wave sequencing, like old, bloody Korg fucking booga boog thing. So there you go. Razi, talk to me.
Can I just characterize, like, in different words, kind of what you seem to be talking about? Like, if you've got a few hardware sequencers, this is just going back to fundamentals to get my head around it. Say in your rack, you have a few hardware sequencers that are all triggering at the same pace because you've got a clock. And each of those just has a knob for every step. And you can set that knob arbitrarily on every step. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 steps. 3 different sequencers of 4 steps each. And you set each knob of each step. 1, 2, 3, 4. You've now got 3 different tracks of things that you can do to a sound. And that's, I think, what you're getting at with traditional sequences. It doesn't necessarily mean we're talking note, 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 note. We're talking about a event that can happen in time, in sequence. And now let's say the second one, the first one's going 1, 2, 3, 4. The second one, maybe it's only 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. So now you've got a complex 3 times 4. Total of 12 steps that's not going to sync up with anything until until they
sync up.
They come back.
Yes, and what I'm used to doing is the way I would normally do this is on the modular, and Ivan, the dope for sequencer, the A155, I think is the best fucking analog sequencer there is, just for reasons. But there's also a tip top. Why am I telling you this, you junkie? There's also a tip top modular sequencer, like a matrix sequencer, which is, they're really cheap because no one gives a fuck about them, but they're great because you can do this sort of thing on them. Where you might have, like, there's technically 16 sequences going at once on this thing, on the tip top, and you can be saying, well, the first line is going to be on the beat, the second line is going to be on a beat and a half, or something like that. So one might be controlling the filter and one might be controlling the resonance. So stuff starts overlapping and moving and doing all this sort of stuff. And that's obviously great on a bass line, but when you start putting pads on it, they start chattering. And going back to the pads thing, if you've got a long pad, but you're setting a kind of a chattering going on a low pass filter with a resonance on it, you start getting a really cool rhythmical thing going on. So yes, when I'm talking about a sequencer, I'm talking about a sequencer that can fuck with controllers, fuck with all of this different stuff, not just notes. Notes are cool, and there's a lot you can do with it. And what I find exciting about the notes is, what's a sequence that, because I used to listen to, Don't Tell Anyone, Howard Jones. When I was a kid, I loved Howard Jones. Howard Jones is actually really fucking good, I'll just say. Or actually, Duran Duran's a better example, because Nick Rogue's sequences, they didn't really mean anything musically. They added feeling and they added emotion. The cool thing about a sequence is when there's a bunch of notes that are going, and that makes sense, that's great. Like, you might have this sequence that's going like C, I'm gonna, nice notes here, C, E, F, G, C, E, F, G, C, E, F, G, C, E, F, G, like that. And that's fantastic. So you're playing in C, and that makes total sense. But now we're gonna play in F, and it's like, well, that E, that ain't really making sense. And that G, that's kind of not really making sense either. But then you might play in D or whatever notes you're playing, but that sequence keeps going with that same thing shining through a different prism. It's going to cause different light. Do you understand? It's going to cause a different emotional response as you are moving around. And when you start playing weird notes in there, like the sequence I was talking about before, you're really going to start some pretty things going on that you're not expecting. That's a fun thing about sequences, and especially if they're based on not 4, not 8, not 16, but 5, but 9, but 11, but 13, but 21. Stuff starts moving around, and it becomes very spacey. Ivan makes sense of this catastrophe that's coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're generally talking about motion sequencing, not musical sequencing. In the modular land, you know, like motion sequencing, or we're making a device do other stuff as a sequence, like that is very easy to find modular, you know, gear that does that. Dedicated keyboards, you know, like synths, like they approach it from the musicality of it first. So, you know, like, you kind of get buried in that. In the DAW, we would just call that automation. You know, you can accomplish the same thing with just automation. You can draw. You can just draw that. Yeah, it doesn't mean it's as good.
Okay. No, I'm gonna let you finish, and then I'm gonna.
Yeah. But also, like, you know, as far as like doing from a keyboard, doing lots of you know, like motion automation. You know, the Korg wave, not the mod wave, the wave state, or the wave station, like those that is made to do that. It does also make it one very, you know, like programming those is like, well, is it's very intimidating, because, you know, like, you end up having to know a lot about that one piece of gear just to get it to do something, which sort of, you can like it or it kind of sucks. I keep going back and forth on that because it's kind of annoying.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think what I was getting at is that the joy about having one of these things is that, for me at least, is that I am introducing a whole bunch of I don't know what I'm doing right now. And that is such an important thing for me, to not know what I'm doing. Because when you get to know gear and you get to know musicality and you start finding yourself starting to repeat the same tricks, when you start pulling in things where it's going, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Because if I do this on a DAW, I'm going to go through and correct stuff and change stuff and make it more logical, because that's just who I am. Whereas if I'm doing it on a sequencer or a sequencer over there, it's like there's a whole bunch of weird shit going on and I just have to deal with it. And yeah, and that's just one more thing. The great thing about using a modular sequencer or a sequencer where it is not quantized as far as pitch goes. If you stick a voltage into an oscillator, it's going to play the note that the voltage is saying, and that might not be a note. That might be a pitch. That's kind of halfway between C and C sharp. And it ain't quarter tones because it's not quantized. That is an absolutely fantastic way of also throwing somebody's out of their head of they think they know what's about to happen. Because if you go dung 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 dung, the head goes, I know what's about to happen right now, although it might not. You've already said that we're on a battleground or a playing field that you are familiar with. But when you're doing something fucking weird, they go, what the fuck? I'm having this rant because I'll be honest, I've started watching Blake 7 again. Right? That makes total fucking sense. Now, if you haven't watched Blake 7, watch Blake 7. It's fucking awesome. And so my whole brain is going, oh shit, that's right. For the win, Diana. Once upon a time, we could do all this weird shit, and it was okay to do weird shit because it was okay to do weird shit, but not anymore. Or at least that's what my brain says. Does somebody want to rescue me right now? Because I'm talking myself into a hole.
If I say anything, it's going to be about software that hasn't been made since like 1993. So it's that's a nod.
Yeah. Let's go.
It's weird. I haven't done anything with independent, like sort of free running or clock synced sequences. Really, everything. The distinction that Ivan was making between automation and step sequencing is kind of an implementation detail in the software and the interface. Like, whatever. If you're sending some steps to the volume fader of your DAW, that's probably automation. If you're then sending it to the CV in of your synth, that's probably just sequencing. But there's still automated stuff in your DAW. The thing that I know that there are press button on for step sequencers in my DAW, but I haven't touched them in forever. I just use the piano roll for everything. But I harken back to Studio Vision Pro, which had arbitrary length tracks within each sequence that you could turn into drum or event tracks and just click, 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 or magic drumstick to draw the velocities. And those tracks would be that very traditional step sequencer thing of arbitrary length, either synced or not synced, either repeating or not repeating. And there was such flexibility in that. And that was just the basic track structure of that app. Like when you go to your track in your DAW, that is your audio channel and it is the thing, it's an entity, it's stuck, and it's the length of the song or it's the full length. There is no, I've said this before, no concept of subsequences that can run freely and independently of the song. And that was such a gift. And that's really the fundamental of what you're talking about. These free running, who knows where it's going to land. It's just going, Jesus, take the wheel. But then you can pare it down and say, no, this is going to repeat every 3 bars. This is going to be a one shot for 16 bars. It's going to occur here, and placing those on the song so that they occur when you want them to, and then they disappear. Or it's just, there's so much to that. Oh my God. I love what you're talking about. And I remember doing it and loving it.
There would have to be, like, I know Ivan's looking at them right now. Probably so is Mark. Wow, really? Wow. I don't know you guys at all. Wow. Because I would be. I would be trying to find those plugins again or something similar to fuck around and say, here's a
Plugins are one thing. Definitely they exist and the functions do exist and there's plenty of Max for Live ways of doing it. But having it built into the way that,
yeah.
like, it's a sequencer first, then it became a DAW because we couldn't even do audio. So there was a fundamental difference. Ableton Live was an audio thing first. Different concept.
And okay, firstly, adapt, manipulate. Yeah, I'm typically a piano roll guy in my DAW. How do you say DAW? How do you say that word?
I just don't like it. I say DAW every time.
It's such a weird DAW. And they go, "What are you, an Australian who pretending you're from New York?" They don't actually say that. I pretend. But that's the thing is, adapt, manipulate. Is that we're fucking around with the whole idea of how can we take it out of that concept. Rob is in S5000 world, and I just don't care. Diana, if you've got a link to Blake 7, like the whole YouTube playlist, because there is one somewhere and I don't know where it is, and Ivan just walked away in disgust, that would be fantastic. Because Blake 7 is that, Rob, we don't care. Watch Blake 7. Like it's and there's a special on YouTube. There's a documentary that is about how they made the soundtrack to that movie, to that series. It's so good. It's so good. God, Blake 7, man. It's just, everyone's bad. Everyone's corrupt. Even the good guys are corrupt. Raziel, what?
Can I say something about sequencers, though?
No!
All right, to Blake's. For adapt, manipulate, I think who just said they live in the piano roll, which is what I do too. Imagine if your piano roll tracks could be starting anywhere within your song and of any arbitrary length, and then they're not there anymore, and they could repeat on themselves, or the stuff on that piano track roll event could be a repeating thing. And you could have other instances of that on other tracks. And when you changed this one, those would also follow. They would also change the note from F to G. All of them do, because they're just clones of that. And you can place that piano roll object anywhere. Anyway, I'm going on and on about a technology that no longer exists, a concept that was lost.
Because that was based on like the whole analog sequence, like in an SH101 or on the Pro fucking 1 and da-da-da, where if you hit a note, the whole thing, you could transpose it. Or if there was a filter thing going on and you increased the amount on the wheel, that would be reflected in the sequencer and da-da-da-da-da. Great fun. Emulator 4 sequencer. Carl, yes, there is, but I don't use it. And it's not what we're talking about right now, Rob. But that's fine. That's fine. We're not judging you. We're talking about Blake 7. Can I just see a hand, everybody here who has seen Blake 7? You put your hand down awfully quickly.
I have been watching through Blake 7 recently.
What does watching through mean? What does that mean?
Sit down and watch an episode or two here and there.
Oh, wow.
Wait, we could only have our hand up if we watch the whole thing, all of the episodes?
Like many, many times. It was what the fuck?
I didn't watch the whole thing, and then I haven't watched it multiple times. I did that with West Wing. Does that?
No, it does not count. Oh my god!
A lot of less synthesizers in the soundtrack.
Dear God. Here's Frank. Frank's coming to air his disgust. Mark, don't listen to these heretics. Blake 7. It's awesome.
It is a fun show. It just occasionally gets a little bit like, I can't deal with this level of
fantastic's. No, you can't deal with that level of fantasticness. Just don't watch series 3, season 3. I think personally is a bunch of crap. Frank says hi.
So we can't watch the whole thing anyway. So you're really just making fun of it. Got it.
It's really good. Season 2 is incredible. Season 2 is a moment in TV. It's
what about
so
season
good.
4?
Sorry?
What about season 4?
Season 4 is okay. It's really good. They get back on track. It's got the best ending of any TV show ever in history. But it's really interesting. And you got to remember that this is this is the BBC trying to do sci-fi because everyone was doing sci-fi.
Oh, I don't think you can forget that while you're watching it.
But it's it's like they have it's like nothing you've ever seen. And if you watch it now, it's like, oh my God, this is now. Everyone is a bad guy. All of the characters in it are all crooks. They're all corrupt. They're playing mind games with each other. They are stealing, murdering. They are, it's not borderline terrorism. They're straight up terrorists. They're killing civilians. They're killing children. They're killing each other. They're killing everyone. Whereas even worse of that is the Terran Federation, who's got fantastic fashion sense. And my God, Servalan, who's the arch nemesis, she's fantastic. But it was all like
You don't need to say anything more. I'm already on board.
Yeah,
I don't hear anything else.
It's very Thatcher England, late 70s, early 80s. Doctor Who got the budget. Blake Seven didn't. Blake Seven got the script. And there's a guy in it named Avon, and he's like kind of a good guy, but he is not. And he's the shit that guy says. And you will hear a whole bunch of Angelspit lyrics because I basically sit there and write down what he's saying. Throwing you a high voltage bouquet and shit like that. Some of us are good leaders. Others are, am I a gifted leader or are you a gifted follower? And he just drops them in there like that. And a lot of the shots, they were one take. So they could, and he just, oh, fuck, they're good.
Yeah, no, the show does win on writing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It does not win on production.
No. But it's really good and it's brilliant. But the sound design, it's all big synthy Delaware synthesizer stuff. Every single sound was built. Every single swish of a door, every blip of a computer, and they were all built for every single episode. And it's just great. And some of the shit they do in there and the way they do it, it's inspiring. It's like, fuck, we need to. And every time I go in a rut, I watch Blake Seven. Ivan, go ahead.
I would put Blake Seven's series finale up against the series finale of The Prisoner any day.
Yeah, so you know,
with you.
They were going to do. They were talking about a 5th season. And there's a convention called Star One that keeps going, which is the Blake Seven convention, which is in England, and they're still doing it. And they were going to pull Paul Derham, who played Avon before he unfortunately passed away a few years ago. They were talking about a follow-up season for like 20 years. And they had it already, and then something would happen, and already, then something happened, and it's like, fuck, it's good. It's so relevant. I don't really know what else to talk about right now. Frank's looking at me. He's about to start screaming. Thank you. This has been really excellent. I really appreciate. I've got notes of things I'm going to do with my pads. Does anybody else want to jump in right now? I asked for that link to Blake Seven and I didn't get it because everyone's just talking so much bullshit. Did anybody else want to talk about anything else before we fuck off to MTV TV?
Maybe think about for next week, like modern stuff that's got good sound design and music composition that's doing something unique. There's probably a few that come to mind, but I don't think launching into that right at this moment is necessarily on, but something I've been thinking about.
Excellent.
Now that we're talking about it.
Thank you so much. Let's make a note on that. I won't be here next week. Rezi, thank you again for taking it.
Yes, indeed.
Frank, please don't sneeze on me. This is the Art of Rock. I know. Every bloody Saturday we're here, or most Saturdays, on Angelspit Music, Twitch. I'm just fuck talking, really. This is Angelspit's Patreon. If you want to help me out, sign up, $3 a month. But if you don't, most of it's free. And members, you're getting a free copy of the Ice Planet 9000 album, which I'm very fucking happy about. And it's there. Go get it. The Industrial Sessions playlist is amazing. It's there. Everybody on this panel owes me a track, by the way. Wednesday night, Alex is going deep dive country on synthesizers, and it's bloody awesome. Razzie, again, thank you so much for being the co-host with the co-most.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, look at that cat action. It's fantastic. We're going to go into tabby time now. Tabby time now. We're rating to MTV TV. Boom. So if you're watching on YouTube, thank you, Rob, for backing Ice Planet 9000. I'll send you something extra. Because I'll send something extra if Patreon supporters actually do it. I'll send you a painting or something. Let's go to MTV TV. It's there. We're going to hang back here and chat. I've got another gig on at 4 o'clock today. Yay. So let me know when we've rated. Let me know when we've rated. Let me know when we've rated.
My chat just rated.
So did it do that thing again that it does?
I paused the video and that because it's also going in YouTube.
So weird and random. Let me know. Okay, we've rated. Okay,